Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being with us today. Power to Save and the AST Transplant Community Advisory Council are proud to present today's webinar, The Space Between Goodbye and Hello, a donor, family, and recipient in conversation. We are very grateful to Eurofins for their generous support of this event. Before we begin the main presentation, we do have a few housekeeping notes to help you engage with today's session. There is currently a viewership polling question displayed for the audience. Please take a moment to answer this question while we finish the remaining announcements. This webinar is being recorded, and the archive will be available on the AST YouTube channel 2 to 3 business days after the live session. Please note, all of your lines have been muted so that only the panelists can be heard clearly for the archive recording. If you have questions for our panelists during the webinar, we encourage you to participate by chatting to the host and panelists via the Zoom chat function or sending your questions via the Q&A button in the Zoom webinar panel. Please note that questions submitted via the chat window may be missed during the presentation, so we recommend using the Q&A button for questions you'd love the moderator to see and be considered for the Q&A session. Finally, when you log off at the conclusion of today's webinar, you will see a link to a short evaluation survey to complete. Please fill out this survey to help us keep our content current and engaging. I will now turn the session over to our moderator, Dr. Ronald Gill of the University of Colorado, Denver, to begin our presentation. Dr. Gill, you are on mute, sir.
Thanks so much, Brian. And on behalf of the Transplant Community Advisory Council of the American Society of Transplant, I really want to welcome you all and our panelists, and thank you all for being with us today. And just in case it's not clear, the American Society of Transplant is actually the largest professional transplantation organization in the United States with over 5,000 members and covers a broad spectrum of expertise in essentially every area of transplantation, medicine, and science. And one of our goals is to increasingly connect with the public transplantation community, donors, recipients, caregivers, by providing reliable and trustworthy information to aid those impacted by transplant. Now, as a scientist myself, we're all zealous about providing information and tools to the public. And of course, that's important, but we can't lose sight of the fact that transplantation ultimately is a profoundly personal journey. So today's webinar actually touches on the humanity of this topic by telling stories from members of our Transplant Advisory Group. So today's seminar, The Space Between Goodbye and Hello, a donor, family, and recipient conversation, is part of that ongoing commitment to connect with the transplant community. So first, we'll begin with the first half of this webinar is pre-recorded with a candid conversation between Kelly Duren, a donor mom, and Charles Cook, a transplant recipient. And then we invite you all to stay with us as we transition to a live Q&A session for the second half of the program, featuring all of our panelists, along with our a special guest, Dr. Jody Jones, will announce later on. So at this time, we'd like to start our video and join us later on for our Q&A portion of the session. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ron Gill. I'm a past president of the American Society of Transplantation. It's my privilege, actually, to be involved in the transplant community efforts of our organization. And right now we have kind of a unique and all too uncommon opportunity to hear perspectives from both the donor side of our field, but also from the recipient side. And that said, I just want to introduce Kelly Duren and Charles Cook. And I think the important thing is just to hear their story and their perspective and how we can somehow bridge big issues of these two communities of people. So Kelly, you want to start off?
Sure. Thanks, Ron. And good morning to Charles and both you and Ron. So I'm going to start with, my name is Kelly Duren, and I'm a donor mom. Here today to talk from the donor perspective. We had a 22-year-old son. His name was Rocky, that had a motorcycle accident and ended up in ER with a brain injury. And our story with organ donation actually began in the ER department there at the local hospital with the doctor sitting knee to knee with me. I can't tell you what his name was. He had blue eyes, but he was telling me that my son was brain dead and that he was not going to make it. And we had tough decisions to make at that point. It was a whirlwind first few moments for me because I couldn't connect with that. And through that process, we had friends show up there at the hospital and had asked me if I was thought about Rocky becoming an organ donor. And I literally looked at them and said, donor, what is that? I had never heard about organ donation up until that point. And so, long story short, we had real quick education on organ donation and what it meant and the process and how it would occur. And so I thought about it. Then I met with our local OPO, our organ procurement organization, and sat down with them and kind of went over everything that we had to do. But it was such a whirlwind for us because we're worrying about the grief and getting family home. My daughter was 5 months pregnant and living in Massachusetts at the time. So, us being out here in the West, I had to tell a female that was 5 months pregnant that her brother was brain dead, and that she needed to travel 3,000 miles home. So, the last thing that I really wanted to worry about at that point was educating myself on organ donation. But I will say that when I sat in a quiet room by myself and I started thinking about it, then having the conversation with family in regards to Rocky giving and his personality and the type of person that he was, we did decide to go ahead and allow him to give that last time. We in the donor world call that the gift of life. Because Rocky was only 22, it was for him being able to give 8 organs that at that point, and a gift of eyesight to 2 people. So we hope countless others through the tissue donation as well. So, but for us, it was just a process of 3 days of, I don't even know where my head was at that point. But we did get through it. Rocky was able to give. And what we couldn't do for our son that day, he alone was able to do for so many going forward. And because he had an 8-month-old daughter, we thought it was really important for her to understand that her dad was a hero to so many people going forward. So there was a lot of emotion there. And when things did finally settle down for me, it was really important from a donor perspective to understand that process that we just went through in 3 days, to really get a better grasp and understanding of what organ donation was and where those organs went and to whom and how that process worked. So, here we are today is I got involved and now I'm part of AST and really just part of my healing process. I should say the majority of it has really been in being involved in the transplantation world and learning and advocating for the donor families out there. So, in a nutshell, Ron, that's kind of where we started.
So, Kelly, one question is, a hand grenade gets thrown into your life, and I can't begin to imagine. Well, unfortunately I can't imagine in my own family. But how did you have the fortitude in that moment to come to that decision?
Teamwork is a big word for me. And could I have done that by myself? Absolutely not. I was a mess. I literally left the hospital room and had to walk outside, and I just kept walking. I had no idea where I was. I just kept walking. If it was not for the staff of our OPO, at the time it was Pacific Northwest Transplant Bank, if it was not for that staff being there for me when I kept thinking I'm desecrating my son's body. There was just so many negatives and positives going through my brain, and then still thinking about the fact that I'm losing a child. I'm never going to see him again. Um, if it wasn't for the staff at the OPO, the staff even at the hospital, and just friends and family helping me when I kept thinking, am I doing the right thing? It was, I've got to get through this process. And it's just so hard to explain because it's really about just keeping one foot in front of the other and just continuing to move forward. And always in the back of my mind thinking, what would my son want?
Yeah.
Because it really is about him at this point. So, would he have wanted us to break down and live in a hole? No, because that wasn't how he was. Listen, this child of mine didn't walk, he ran. He never walked. And he liked to push boundaries, but his true belief was we need to live life in that dash between birth and death. And so that just kept coming back to me is what would he want us to do? And he was very much the giver, always the big kid, the big jock, always sticking up for the little guy if he saw he needed the help. So for us, it was really a transition of what do you think in the family with his widow and, the other family members. So I don't know if there's an easy answer because everybody travels a different path, Ron. For me, it's when I work with families now, it's all about telling them, asking them questions and saying, I want you to think just a little bit outside of the box, not so much about your grief right now and what you're going through, but what would your loved one want? And so if I just kept coming back to what would Rocky want?
Yeah, of all things, the word that comes, that screams to me, all this, Kelly, is courage. Phenomenal courage in that moment. I can't imagine.
Well, it's really easy for all of us to put the little check mark or check the yes box, right, on our driver's license for organ donation. But I think, and one heart recipient that I deal with here a lot, albeit not Rocky's recipient, but he often says it's easy to check that box. He goes, but for a donor family, it takes true courage to follow through with that commitment.
Absolutely. Yeah. We'll come back to a little bit of that. So Charles, you're on the receiving end of this sort of thing. So tell us about your experience.
Yes, sir. Hey, Ron. Hey, Kelly. Glad to be here talking to you guys today. This is one of my favorite things to do in the whole world, is having a good conversation with some good friends, because it's an exchange of ideas and information, and hopefully somebody listening to this will get something out of it. But Kelly, what you just said at the end is kind of the lead into where I always start, is that when you say yes, when you check that little box, then that makes it possible for somebody like me to sit here and say thank you and to explain what this side of it is about. So thank you. Let's start with that. Although as a recipient, I never felt that saying the words thank you would be enough to my donor family. And also, you talking about courage, also I put selflessness in there, because the best day of my life was one of the worst days of yours, and I can't imagine being in that situation on the other side. But since knowing you, I can put a face to someone who did that, who did exactly that. And speaking for myself and every other transplant recipient out there, the gratitude is immeasurable. When I woke up in surgery, I opened my eyes for the first time in recovery, and I'm like, all right, I'm alive. Thank you, God. You got me through another one. Then I remember, thinking I'm alive because I have someone else's heart in my chest right now. And I broke down and started crying because I never felt so thankful, so humble, and so unworthy all at the same time. I was thankful because I was still alive. Somebody gave me that gift. I was humble because I couldn't get it myself. I couldn't, heal the situation that I was in. And then felt unworthy because I knew that people die on the waiting list every day waiting for an organ. Why was I the one chosen, to get this heart in my case, when other people weren't? And so I was crying for weeks on end. And then the way I finally got right with it was I was literally in my bathroom, wee hours of the morning, tears running down my face. I'm like, if I can't get a hold of this, then we're going to need to seek professional help. And I tried to put myself in the mindset of the person who had donated their heart, because to me, this had to be an individual who, with their final wishes, wanted to do something to help somebody else have a chance at a better life. I became the beneficiary of that goodwill. In my case, somebody I didn't even know. In my mind, if that ain't paying it forward, then I don't know what is. So at that moment, I decided to live my life in a way to honor my donor and their family by doing whatever I could to pay it forward for all the folks coming along behind me to make it a little bit better for them. That's what I did decide to do then. That's what I've been doing ever since. That is why I'm sitting here talking to you guys today. And I am so honored and humbled to sit here and talk to you, because I know you. And I know you're a good person. I know Ron. You guys care, and we're trying to make things better for the ones coming along behind us. And that's kind of where I am sitting. If you want to tell me, or if you want me to tell you a little bit about my story, about how I got in that situation. I was born with a heart condition called HCM, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. It ran on my mom's side of the family. I was born with it. I didn't know anything about it till I was 17. I got diagnosed. I was a midshipman at the United States Naval Academy. In high school, I played football, wrestled, ran track, athletic, never had an issue. Made it through Plebe summer up there, which is the kind of boot camp part, the hard physical thing. Made it through that with no problem. And then went for a run. The first week, the upperclassmen got back, started getting chest pains. Go get those checked out. One thing led to another. Hey, you have this thing called HCM. It can kill you, so be careful and have a nice life. And then nothing happened. There was really no follow up until I was driving home from work one day, and I had a massive stroke behind the wheel of the car on the highway back home in Georgia, where I grew up. And that was the first sign that I had some serious health issues, that I was going to have to contend with. And as a matter of fact, 3 days ago. So it's been 20 years and 3 days. So I'm glad to be sitting here. March 9th was my mom's birthday, 2005 was when I had that stroke, so happy about that. And then I was married to a girl from Ontario. So when I recovered from the stroke, we knew that I was going to, or at that point, we didn't think I was going to be around a lot longer. So let's move closer to your family, so the kids will have the support network if something happens to me. And then, got up here in Ontario, and eventually I went into heart failure, went down to the hospital for a regular checkup, then you could go home for 100 days. They did a stress test, said your heart's worn out to the point that you need a transplant. Then they said there's too much pressure in your chest from another test. So we need to do something because we can't let you go home. So they gave me a mechanical heart called an LVAD, left ventricular assist device. That would take over the work that my heart could no longer do on its own. And during that surgery, a lot of complications came up. I actually wound up dying twice on the table. They brought me back. I lost a lot of blood, which made my kidneys run dry for too long. They wound up dying, so they put me on hemodialysis right away. And then when I woke up, then I've got this electrical cord hanging out of my belly going to a unit called a wall unit that plugged into the wall like a lamp, because that was the charging unit for the batteries that my heart now ran on. And I was prepared for that, even though it sounds weird. What I wasn't prepared for was to look down at my chest and see these tubes coming out, going to this machine I've never seen before. And I was like, what's that? There's some red stuff. Is that blood? Is that my blood? What's going on here? And they explained, unfortunately, you lost your kidney function. You're on dialysis now. And I was angry, frustrated, confused. I was angry because I'm like, you didn't even tell me that my kidneys were at risk during the surgery. I was confused because my heart's in my chest, my kidneys are in my back. I think I never even thought about them. And how can something, working on in my chest affect something in my back? And then I was frustrated because there's nothing I could do about it. So as soon as I was ambulatory, which is one of my favorite medical terms, which means I could get up and walk out of my room, I went over, to the room next door. I didn't know who was in there. I just, hey, you wouldn't believe what happened to me. I said my story to the patient that was in there. They were kind enough to listen. And then they said, well, listen, what happened to me? And so in that moment, my whole outlook changed for the better, because when I wake up with all this stuff going on that I was not expecting, then the first thing I felt was different. Like, this isn't supposed to happen. You know, I came in here for this one thing, now this. Then I felt alone. Like, oh my God, I'm the only one that's ever had to deal with a problem like this. And by listening to that other patient, then for one, I knew that I wasn't alone, because they said things had not gone according to plan in their surgery. And then number two, the way my mind works is that person's sitting there talking to me, and so that means they're alive. So obviously they found a way to deal with their issues, and if they can do it, then I can do it. And then that's what I've tried to do ever since, is talk to other patients and say, you are not alone. Things get messed up, but you can get through it, because look at me, and if I can do it, then you can do it. And that's been my whole emphasis for what I've done afterwards. I volunteer for every kind of organization that I can. I share the story as often, as possible, to as many people as possible, because I think there's somebody out there that needs to hear it, just like I needed to hear it. Because before that, I never talked to anybody about anything at all. I was kind of the strong, silent type, and things happen in the little conversations. This whole thing about organ donation sounds like science fiction. Okay, my heart's wearing out. So yeah, what we're going to do is we're going to wait. Somebody's going to pass away. They're going to donate their heart, and then they're going to take their heart and put it in my chest, and it's going to work. That doesn't sound like it makes sense, but that's what happens. So I learned, the kind of importance of organ donation, and then I try to be the example of the good stuff that comes after it. It's not that I received it, it's what I do with it, with that gift. So that's kind of where I am.
Yeah. So now you're the strong vocal type, which is awesome.
Oh no, I'm not as strong as I used to be, but I am definitely more vocal, that's for sure.
Yeah. So seeing the two of you, I mean, you've both gone through two completely different kinds of trauma, right? And yet connected by it, right? So Kelly, what would you, especially you're part of this gift. What, like, you've talked about closure, like being on the in a donor family. What does closure look like for you?
Oh, wow. That's a loaded question.
Well, okay, we don't have 2 hours for that. I get it, but
No, it's really, I mean, if I can condense closure, if you've ever lost anybody in your life, there's a lot of emotions that go with that, right? Shock, awe, anger. There's just so many parts of that grieving process. And from a donor perspective, because your loved one has donated, you still kind of have a little bit of that open-ended feeling of, we haven't seen how things have gone. That those gifts were given, how is that? Are they being a good steward to those organs? Did that organ take? How are they doing, more importantly? And so you're kind of still left in a null and void. It was 3 years before we really had a good grasp on what all of Rocky's recipients were doing. So there was 3 years of limbo, if you will, a little bit for us. I, on the other hand, being a fix-it type of person, got involved in charity work here at a local level with our OPOs. Actually, got involved because Rocky died in a motorcycle accident, got involved in CHAIR, a nonprofit here in the state of Idaho that helps motorcycle accident victims and or their families in the event of death, and walking a walk with those families that had their loved one that was part of organ donation. And so through all of that process and giving back, it actually heals me. It's not that I need a pat on my back. It actually helps my heart heal through that process, knowing that Rocky's death wasn't in vain, that look at all of these little outlets that have turned into something so phenomenal because of that. And so that's part of my healing process. So I still today continue to heal. You don't get over it. You just learn how to navigate those new avenues, right?
Yeah, I get that. So, you know, for the two of you, how important, it's a touchy subject, right? Because people feel very differently about this, but having any connection between the donor family and the recipient, like yourself, Charles, how do you think about that? Like
Well,
Charles.
at first, it was we get to write a letter to our donor family. And, you know, if they respond, that's great. If they don't, that's okay too. At least you put it down. And I always felt that thank you is not enough, you know, but what else can you say? I'll never be able to talk to the person who actually donated the heart. So I have to write to the family. And in my case, it's I can show you better than I can tell you because this is a gift that I received that I can never pay back. So I have to pay it forward, which is why I do the stuff that I do. And also, my fear would be, again, like I said, this is one of the worst days of your life as the donor family. I don't want to bring that up again. You know,
Yeah.
I would be open to it if they want to reach out to me and, you know, we can talk and that kind of stuff. But that was the way I looked at it.
Oh, always say their name, never omit them.
Mhm.
Uh, from a donor perspective, I say his name all the time. His name was Rocky. His name is Rocky. And we want to talk about what a great thing that my son did. And
Through
I
that.
take no credit. We as a family take no credit for that because it was Rocky and his ability to be able to give the gift of life going forward for total strangers in our book. But we didn't look at it that way. We looked at it more in the aspect of um, what he can't do for himself today because we're not going to change his outcome due to a motorcycle accident. Look at what he can do for so many people going forward. Did I really truly understand that right at the beginning? No. Do I have such a better grasp on all of the great things that he was able to do and the domino effect for friends and families and generational? We had a younger son. He was a junior in high school when that accident occurred, going into his senior year. 360 kids graduated with him that year. Out of that, 113 of those kids became organ donors because they walked this walk with us when they turned 18 as a senior. So it's a ripple effect of
Absolutely.
what it's so great because, you know, we hear myths. I mean, I had people walking up to me and saying, how can you do that? Are you sure that they didn't just kill him? I mean, you know, all of the negative myths that we hear, we know better because we walked that as a family. Those doctors did everything possible that they could do for him. But the bottom line is he hit his brainstem and he damaged his brainstem. And Ron, you probably know better than Charles and I there. There's nothing that we could do at that point. And his body was not going to make it either. This isn't, but I wouldn't want him to live on life support, nor would he want that. So, but the ripple effect that just continues on is so phenomenal to me. And the reason why I tell people, I really think that you should think about organ donation because what it can do for others going forward is just magical in our book. And Rocky will forever be a hero to so many. And for his daughter and that legacy, I mean, imagine being 8 months old, not really knowing your dad other than stories and visiting his gravesite, which is what she does all the time, and talks to him. That's her way of coping. But now that she's graduated high school and moving into college, and all of those wonderful things, she can actually have such a great conversation with people about organ donation and why it's important to her, and her story is going to be different than me as mom. So there's just so many great things that we just don't have enough time to talk about here. Um, Charles, you are a living legacy of, for me, when I have those moments of doubt, and even at almost 19 years, I have those days that I can think about the conversations that you and I have, and I can say, no, we did do the right thing. And Charles is a perfect example of why we did it. So, in a
Goosebumps
nutshell.
over here, Kelly. But thank you. This is why these groups need to have these conversations, because that is the thing. This is a gift. You know, I wish every recipient and donor family could get it, because part of it is you hope that you're doing the right thing. You know, like you said, you did the right thing by donating. I hope that I'm treating the gift that I received the right way by trying to do something with it and make it better for the ones coming along behind us. So you just saying that, you know, makes my whole day. I was actually getting goosebumps while you were sitting there talking, and not because it's cold up here too, which it is. But this is fantastic. So thank you so much for saying all that. The only other thing I would say, as far as the negative side on the or negative talk around being a recipient, is you're sitting there and it's weird enough that you have to wait, you know, to get that organ. But people are like, too bad somebody had to die, you know, in order for you to live. And you kind of get that guilt, you know, because you're waiting for that to happen. But I think it's very important for every recipient to know that you had no hand in your donor dying, you know, even though people outside of this world will think that or might say that to you. You did not, you know, they died, they were going to die, and then we are the good thing that comes out of that. Like you said, their death doesn't go in vain. And so I take that very serious, because every day that I wake up that I have this gift, I wouldn't even be here today. So I try to make it a good day by doing something good for somebody else.
Yeah.
Well, just remember, you can't, Rocky, you know, in our case, Rocky's death, we couldn't change that day for him, right?
Right.
No matter what we did, we weren't going to change the outcome for him that day. But what he could do alone was change the outcome for so many going forward. And I think that's real important for recipients to know that donor families do look at it that way. So,
yeah,
that's awesome.
Like I said before, I feel completely inadequate with both of you, you know, in this kind of conversation. And Charles, you know, what strikes me is that we get to sit here and talk to you because of what people like Kelly and her son Rock actually went through.
Absolutely. So I wouldn't even be here without somebody like you, Kelly. Thank you so much.
Glad for
it's just such it. I encourage, if there's a donor family that gets to hear this, I encourage you, educate yourself. It's so very important to educate yourself, regardless of which way you choose to go. Educate yourself on organ donation. Understand what it is that you want for yourself, and have the conversation with your family members. Do not put this conversation off. Probably not great dinner conversation, I will say that. But have the conversation. Make sure that your family understands your wishes. You do not ever, I never want to see a family be in a position that we were in, not understanding organ donation, never hearing those two words, and you're worrying about grief and having to make decisions on a life in the ER department. Now you're coupled with this as well. Just take the time and educate yourself, right, Ron? I mean, the information is out there.
Yeah, it is. Well, Kelly and Charles, thank you both so much. Really appreciate your sharing your stories.
Thanks, Ron, by the way, for all that you do in the transplant world on both sides of that.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
And Charles, always.
You, Kelly, thank you so much. And for every recipient out there, find somebody to talk to, another recipient. Nobody knows what you're going through better than somebody that's already been through it themselves. Peer support is where it's at.
Yep, same on the donor side.
So I want to thank you all for engaging with us. And we'll now transition to a Q&A time. And we have a lot of very thoughtful and insightful questions. And we won't really have time to get to all of them, but we'll do the best we can to navigate through them. And before we do that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Jody Jones, who is a clinical psychologist from the Cleveland Medical Center. I'd like to have her introduce herself. She's a special guest to join us.
Thank you. It is such a privilege to be here. I am a clinical psychologist who has worked in transplant now for close to 25 years, and certainly have heard a lot of stories, seen a lot of tragedies and success stories play out over time. I was just actually telling a colleague that I would like to use this video to show our recipients when they're getting prepared to write their letters, because there are so many people who really struggle with this. And in fact, I was just seeing someone this morning, I was telling the panel earlier, who had heard from her donor family, and she's just grieving the loss of this person. I think it's something, Charles, that I think is sometimes largely understood about the transplant experience overall, is that feeling of grief because you know that you are in your situation because someone is no longer here. And Kelly, I was, if I may, interlude and interject and go ahead and ask a question right off the bat. For me, when I'm talking to recipients about, they're saying all the things that Charles said, like thank you's not enough. I don't have the words. I don't know how to do this. They also dance around a lot, like, oh, I don't want to make them feel bad. Maybe it's too soon, or around the holidays. And I said, and I'm trying to assure them, look, do you think that there's ever a day that they're not thinking about their loved one? There's no way that you can control that. And in addition, if you think you're avoiding a holiday, you may end up writing them and they get this thing in some random Wednesday in April, and it happens that was that person's birthday. So you don't know. But Kelly, if there was some kind of succinct sort of message that I could give anybody who's thinking about writing one of these letters, what would you say?
Oh boy. We never worry about omitting their name. We want the name said because that tells us that we're remembering, right? We're remembering who that person is and what they contributed here while on Earth. And so we're always going to have anniversary dates. We're going to have birthdays, those types of things. And we don't want to measure it based on those birthdays. Hearing from the recipient family, letting us know that they received the organ, that they're doing really well. I mean, how are they doing, more importantly, right? And that helps us with our closure. So, and never, a lot of people think that the two words, thank you, we say them every day, right? Multiple times a day. But I don't think that people really stop and think about how important or significant those two words can actually be. And to a donor family, as Charles and I have talked about in the past, is those two words are very significant. And thank you really is enough to start that conversation.
Yeah. So there are a number of questions here. I'm going to start with it's from Allison. I'm just going to read this, and I think this is probably more directed to you, Kelly. Yes, there are professional answers to this question, but it says this. It said, "Thank you so much for sharing your stories. From your perspectives, what do you think is the most powerful way to dispel the myth that if you're a donor, the hospital won't try to save you? It's so disheartening to hear this from people when I broach the topic of organ donation."
Yeah, I hear that a lot when I work with families, especially. And what I find is the people that are making those statements are just not educated on truly what organ donation is, bottom line. And that's usually what I find is when I start asking the questions to them based on what they're saying, they don't have good answers. It's just what they've heard in the grapevine. And I believe that education is important. So if you're really interested in becoming an organ donor, spend a little bit of time. Ron, the information is out there. We could probably put a link or two out there if you're interested. But the information is out there to truly get the right information. Yes, there are myths out there. Do things maybe potentially occur? I don't know. I'm not a medical doctor. But what I can tell you from this family standpoint, my son had a brain injury. There were 3 different brain doctors that did test that on 3 different occasions to make sure that he was in fact brain dead. So I have the utmost confidence in our medical staff and what they're doing to assure that they did everything that they could for my son prior to letting me know that he was officially brain dead. So every conversation, boy, Ron, that's real tough. But I go back to the facts and looking that up, and don't always worry about the conspiracy theories that are out there. Actually do your own homework and make that decision based on what you're learning, not what you're hearing.
If I could add something to that, the person who trained me in transplant psychology had the perfect comeback for that, because she said, you know, we're not to be crude, but we're not out scraping dead bodies up off of the pavement. When someone's an organ donor, there is brain death, but their body is alive. And if anything, if that treatment team were invested in trying to make you a donor, they would actually be working round the clock to keep you alive, because and obviously they would be saving you. So I think there's a real misconception that comes from watching shows like ER or a lot of soap operas where the team in the ER is actually participating in some transplant that's taking place later, and that is so not the case. These are completely separate. But the truth is that they need to work monumentally hard to keep you alive, to make you eligible for organ donation. So anybody who's thinking that they're just going to let you die, it's the complete opposite. Sign your forms so that they'll work really hard to keep you alive.
Understand that one of the things, there are a lot of people that are signed up to be organ donors, but less than 1% actually become organ donors due to the way that they die.
Right. And Jody, something very important that was embedded in what you just said was that there are tremendous firewalls that separate medical care in a crisis moment like that from the potential going on to organ donation. They're completely severed and incredibly regulated. And that's just the nature of the field.
It is.
Okay. And this is, although this was addressed to Kelly, but it involves both Charles and Kelly. Is there, and this is an interesting question, is there a time that is too soon to try to contact the donor or donor family? You're muted, Kelly, because you're being a coward.
I'll jump in there then. It's okay.
I was going to say, Charles, you go first on that.
Sure, no problem. I am here live. So my nurse practitioner told me, a good way to do it. She said, I know you're going to want to write right away, but there's no pressure. Don't put that on yourself, but try to do it within that first year. And so I think it took me 11 months of going back and forth. Like I said, I struggle with the thank yous not enough. I know better than that now. Thank you, Kelly, for clearing that up for me, and hopefully for some other folks that are out there struggling with it as well. But sometime within that first year was what I was told. And I think, like I said, it took me 11 months to do it. Even when I sent the letter, I didn't know if I would expect to get a response back, but I just want to let you know that I am very thankful for this gift. And like I said in our interview before, was I can show you better than I can tell you. Thankful or thank you is good, but let me show you what I'm going to do with this. I'm not just going to take it for granted, and I can't just say, you know, great, I'm alive now. I need to do something to make it better for others coming along behind us.
Yeah, and I so agree with that, Charles. And I might just say, from a donor perspective, we all need to have patience and grace for donor families. Everybody travels a different path through the grieving process. Some might want to know right away, and others, it might take 3 years. For me, getting the letters from the recipients finally opened kind of a door, because they told me a little bit about them. A grade school teacher that needed my son's, or got my son's pancreas, and her husband being maritime, and what the kids growing up, mom being ill all the time. Now they have this freedom of being with mom without being ill. A young man that needed a kidney, that worked with at-risk youth. When we start hearing those stories about those recipients, albeit it might be just a couple of paragraphs, it helps that healing process begin in that last section. And Jody, you probably deal with so many more patients, but that it's really important to get that first. How are you? The thank you, obviously, but really more importantly, how are you doing? And is that organ, doing justice for you? So.
Okay, some very good questions and comments coming back. Too bad we don't have 2 more hours. This is an interesting one. This is probably going to be directed to Kelly again. Do you think that a family has gone through the donation process like you should accompany families at the hospital who are experiencing the same situation? Could that make a difference?
Yes, it does. And I'm living proof of that, because a part of my healing process was actually getting involved and helping families walk that walk. And if I can make it just a little bit easier for a family going through that, whether it's answering questions or just simply being there and listening and being unbiased, and just hearing their story, this is the club that none of us donor families want to be in. Unfortunately, here we are, right? And some of the trials and tribulations and challenges that we dealt with, we can help those families navigate through and make it a little bit easier for them. So I'm all about that, and I'm walking proof that it does make a difference.
Well, you've actually, this has just been very recent. This has actually happened very recently with you, has it not?
Yes. I actually had a motorcycle accident victim that did not make it, and he was an organ donor. His family was not aware that he had signed up to be an organ donor. So you can just imagine the phone call that I received. It was a lot of negative from the family at first, and a lot of it, the negativity was simply because they just didn't understand organ donation. They'd never heard about it. Their son had the foresight to sign up for that. And so, is it an easy walk for a donor family to go in and help? I'm not going to lie and say it is, because it's not. Some families that I help, I can compartmentalize, and I can get them through that. I still go out into my car and break down before I drive home. And then there are other families that hit me right at the gut and take me right on back to the night that we dealt with that. And that's just me having a heart and empathy for what they're dealing with. But at the same time, it does help me by helping them. It's tough to understand until you kind of walk that walk.
Okay, I keep seeing questions queuing up here that I'm anxious to ask. Charles, there's an issue, there's a delicate issue, and you've actually referred to it. As I mentioned at the outset, we've started this community group. That was my passion when I was the AST president, was to have this connection and people just like you connected with us. And an issue that came up with one of our members was kind of this pressure for gratitude. In other words, I mean, there's no getting around. Those of you listening to this who are an organ recipient, you know the challenges, the day-to-day challenges of living with this. There's just no getting around that. And one of our members said, gosh, whenever I say I'm having a tough time or whatever it is, from her perspective, it was like, well, just shut up and be grateful that you're alive, right? Which is not really hearing her. And so Charles, like the question, the question actually was, have you felt pressure from healthcare providers or people in the community to just be grateful all the time? Does the question make sense?
It makes sense. Fortunately, I have not felt that. My team has been very supportive, and there's no instruction manual about how you're supposed to do this. As Kelly said, we're each trying to figure out how to do it one day at a time, one foot in front of the other, and you learn. And why I always say peer support is so great is because you're not the first person to have to walk this path. There are people that have done it already. So try to get a hold of them. They can't tell you how to do it. They can just say, this is what I did. And either it worked or it didn't. And then you take that knowledge from that experience and then choose your own path. Now, the one thing when I woke up in recovery, the doctor said, you got a good heart. It came from far away. You should be glad to have it. That was it. That was all the discussion I ever had about it. And, I've tried to get my mindset where it might sound hokey, but I'm to the point that I do feel that way, that every day that I wake up, it's a gift. I say I don't have bad days anymore because I wake up in the morning, I open my eyes, I take 2 deep breaths. That second one's to make sure the first one wasn't a fluke. And if it catches, then I'm already ahead of the power curve for the day because I'm alive. And even if it's days that aren't so good, some days are better than others, then it's still better than being dead, right? Which is what could have happened without the gift of life that I received with my heart and my kidney. I received 2 of them. So how can I have a bad day? I'm still human, so things don't always go your way. But I know that what I ask people is just give me one more day. I know today might suck or whatever, but tomorrow could be the day that everything turns around. But if you give up and you never get to tomorrow, then how are you going to know? So I'm pretty curious. I want to see what tomorrow's going to bring. And I get up not knowing what's going to happen. Today's been pretty good for a Thursday. I'm sitting here talking to you guys, and it's a good day.
Yeah. I mean, Charles, wouldn't you say that these things aren't mutually exclusive, right? To be profoundly grateful, eternally grateful for what we call the gift of life is great, but to also deal with the reality and the humanity of struggling at times is also a reality. And to pretend
Absolutely.
that isn't happening doesn't, right?
There's stuff that I say that they don't put in the brochure. Like I take 61 and a half pills every day to stay alive, to keep my organs healthy. They don't talk about that. All they show, like Jody was saying, like in the movies and stuff, oh, you got your transplant, you go back to your life. There's a lot that goes into it, that you don't know unless you're in it. And so, there's struggles. But I always say all of that stuff is a very small price to pay to have a rest of my life, So I'm a very positive person, and that wasn't always the case, but it's experience, things could be a lot worse than they are, and I'm doing pretty good. So I try to share that with others.
Charles, did you ever experience that? Some patients will tell me, recipients, that they actually start to feel guilty when they're feeling bad or kind of going through a bad stretch, um, because they feel like, well, they were given this second chance, so every single day actually should be, this sort of exuberant, wonderful walking on clouds kind of thing, and it's like what you're saying, I try to reassure them, look, your donor also did not have all 100% good days, and I'm sure your donor family would understand that life going on means life, not joy all the time. But did you go through periods of that where you were actually feeling guilty for feeling bad?
No, because I figured out early on that no one can tell you how you're supposed to feel, how you're supposed to do this. They gave me a transplant manual saying this is what's going to happen with the surgery, and that they didn't tell me what to do with it afterwards. You kind of learn that on your own. That's on the job training. And so one thing I want to say to recipients is whatever you feel it. There's no right or wrong because everyone's walk is different. And the one thing that I want to get across or try to get across is you don't have to go through this alone. I can't do it for you, but I can do it with you. And if we carry the burden together, it's a little bit lighter for each one of us instead of trying to do this all by yourself. And I hope that answers your question.
Right. We're getting close to the end here. And there's one quick question that we can't answer now, but it's an important one. It was, how do you find a community of transplant recipients and donor families? And at least a little bit is what we're trying to do here. But that's a important question. Maybe we can address that on our Facebook page or what have you. But that's a very important and good question. But
I
importantly,
addressed that, Ron, in the chat. Use your OPO.
Excellent. So as we get close to the end here, I just want to give Charles and Kelly and Jody an opportunity to make any final thoughts. Anything else on your mind for this?
I'll start with my final thought would be educate yourself. It's oh so important, regardless of which way you choose to go. Educate yourself. It's out there. The information is out there. And then the other important thing that I found from a donor family perspective is find a recipient. They could be in your area. They don't need to be a recipient of your loved one's organs. Find a recipient and start having these conversations. This is what this webinar is all about. Charles and I have done that. I've done that with other recipients here in my area, because on those days that I'm having a tough time, let me tell you, recipients like Charles and others just really ground me and bring it home for me and make me understand that there is a positive to that darkest hour that we've traveled. So find that person, connect with a recipient, they're out there, and just start having conversations. Charles and I's conversations were pretty raw and just there, and I consider him a friend, and he will forever be part of our family. So find them. They're out there. It will help.
I back you up 200%, Kelly, because that's what I was going to say too, is they talk about this being an uncomfortable or strange or, kind of situation or topic. But the reason it's so strange and uncomfortable is because we don't talk about it. That's all it takes is a conversation. You don't have to be an expert, just be open and honest. And a conversation is an exchange of ideas and information with another person. And you don't have to be on the same side of an issue, as we've proven in this. Hopefully people take from this that here's where I'm coming from, and here's where you're coming from. Maybe we can meet somewhere in the middle. I'm going to learn something from you, and hopefully you learn something from me too. And we both leave this conversation better. That's all I got to say. Just talk to somebody, just like Kelly said.
Right. Well, unfortunately,
I know we made the right decision when I get to have those conversations.
Yeah. Well, there's some wonderful questions and comments going to have to leave on the table for now, and maybe we can follow up on some of them on our social media platforms. Maybe that's a plug right there. But in any case, I just really want to thank Kelly and Charles and Dr. Jones for being a part of this, and for all the rest of you who are participating with us online. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. The AST Empower to Save would like to extend a heartfelt thank you to Dr. Gill, our incredible panelists, and all of our attendees today, as well as Eurofins for their generous support for this session. In about a week, you'll receive an email from Zoom with access to a free on-demand recording for today's webinar, or you can visit AST's YouTube channel. Before you go, please remember to take a moment to complete your evaluation survey within Zoom. Thank you again for being part of today's excellent session. Thank you.
Thank you all.